Hello, everyone. Good morning and good night. This is a podcast where we really just talk about whatever comes up and whatever's happening in our lives between our two hosts. My name is Will, or also known as Chobra, and always joined by my good friend, Matt Demers. How are you, Matt?
Hey dude, how's it going? I am having a good morning. A friend of mine messaged me and was like, "Hey, I'm selling turnips for like $4.90 or like $5.90 or something like that." So I woke up literally at 8:30, saw that message. She's in Ireland, so just saw that message and then made a tidy $4 million bell profit. So I'm having a good morning.
Holy, I just so I haven't bought turnips yet in New Horizons. I miss it every week, and then I'm just like I could ask, like people in the States when it's nighttime here, if I can like drop by to buy them, but I was just like, I'll get it next week, and then I keep forgetting to wake up on Sunday morning in time to log in.
I'm usually a big sleeper. I love sleeping in, and it's the funny thing where Animal Crossing, or at least buying turnips, is what is getting me up and like up and awake and that kind of stuff. So I am I don't know, the stock market, which is like the pun, the turnips stock market, whatever. That's like what's getting me on every day, because you can track your prices. Basically, for people who don't have the game, you buy turnips in game on Sunday morning until noon, and then every day afterwards your shop in game will sell or will buy those turnips for a different price. So from midnight to noon it'll be one price, and then from noon to midnight it'll be another price. And the idea is that you want to buy low, sell high, or you want to sell higher than you bought it for in order to make a profit. And you can go to other people's towns online and you can use their prices. So that makes it a lot easier to find good prices, because usually someone in a friend group or on a Discord or something like that will have a good price for the week. But people have data mined the entire algorithm for how people determine the price points and that kind of stuff. They've ripped apart the game and basically said, okay, this is how it determines the pattern that you have for the week. There's like 4 standard patterns. Here's how you find out the one that you're on. And for me, just tracking those prices and seeing how much profit I would be making, or where I could be making more money, is like probably one of the things that's getting me logging on every day, at least twice. Check my prices in the morning, check my prices in the evening. So it's funny. I think we've talked about Animal Crossing so much on this podcast already, but it's more of just sharing my good fortune. Thank you, Platinum Paragon, who is a lovely person on Twitter, who does video game academic. She's like an academic, but she does like a lot of gaming focused things with like rigorous research and that kind of stuff. I just want to shout her out, because
right on.
She's doing something that not a lot of other people are doing, and that takes like a lot of work. And check out her stuff. Her name's Platinum Paragon on Twitter. But yeah, dude, how's it going with you? Sorry, I took the reins a little bit there.
Nah, it's all good. For me, I mean, things were going great until like 4 hours ago.
Okay, that's always good.
Things are going great. In terms of like gaming, I've been diving obviously into. I'm now in the rabbit hole that is Final Fantasy, and that's been overall good. Lots of shock, but overall good. But then about 4 hours ago on stream, somehow chat rallied behind horror games. So
oh no!
I'm apparently playing Resident Evil 7, and Resident Evil 7, for those who don't know, I'm very bad with scary games, and Resident Evil 7 is a game where I played it. I've actually played through a good chunk of it, and when it came out, I don't know why I bought it. I think I bought it because I was like, everyone seems so hyped for this, and I really liked Resident Evil 4, actually. That was like the first scary game I ever played, and so I thought, oh, this could be cool. And then because it was so well set up, a lot of people kind of give it props for going back to Resident Evil roots of more like scary ambiance and things like that. I think the fact that it was done so well kept me interested, but then after a while I was like, I just can't do it. I can't do it. So I never finished it, and somehow we took a roller coaster, and here I am.
Chat
playing
remembers.
Resident Evil 7.
Chat always remembers.
Yeah.
They don't give you a break.
So I am now a Final Fantasy and horror game streamer. Is what we've decided apparently.
That's the grand irony, right? Is that if you're a horror game enthusiast, like we both know people who like horror movies,
Oh, yeah.
you know, and horror games and that kind of stuff. And the thing is while those people get scared, it's not as entertaining to watch those people. Because they're in control of themselves, you know. They know the experience. Right. They know.
Oh, I am
not
in control.
Healthily process it. I'm not a horror game person either. I'm not a horror movie person either. I'm a big wimp. I just don't like some people. I think the psychology of it is people like getting scared. People like what.
Yeah, no. Some people, like the thrill.
Yeah, like that thrill. They like what their, how their body responds to it. I know that sounds a little bit weird, but just the adrenaline rush of that kind of stuff. I don't like that whatsoever. I really don't. I find it very uncomfortable and just very usually if I'm, I went on a date once to a horror movie, and oh my gosh, that was a great time. I went to go see The Grudge with when I was
oh my.
Yeah, I went to see The Grudge when I was 16, I think, and I remember just staring at the corner of the movie theater for the entire movie. I don't even remember what was in the actual movie. I just was like, God. Okay, I'm with a first date with this girl. I really like her.
Oh man.
I don't want to seem like a wimp. I'm just gonna I just stared at the top corner of the screen, and just that was where my brain was for the entire movie. It was great.
That's rough.
I'm sorry, Simone. I lied. I did not watch the movie. I hope you can forgive me if you ever find this podcast.
Oh man, but yeah, that's pretty much what I've been up to. I mean, otherwise, my days have been pretty same day in, day out. I'm staying safe, staying healthy.
Good shit.
And yeah, not much else has happened.
Tell me about your reverse Final Fantasy, because you started with the remake and then went back to the classic.
Yeah, which I can see why it's not the obviously not the recommended route, because it really messes with your brain a little bit. But I have no regrets, because as someone who never played Final Fantasy 7 nor apparently really ever got spoiled on the game's story, which was a shock factor for both me and my viewers who hung out for most of the run, is I cannot believe that I made it the 23 years without being spoiled really about any big story point in the original game.
Did you get ever spoiled on okay, so we'll give.
Let's just call it out. Yeah, we're gonna
give a spoiler warning. I've seen other shows,
but this is only about the original.
This is only about the original, obviously. But it's obviously going to happen in the remake, or it might be subverted in the remake. But my point is that if you are interested, if you've somehow avoided the meme of Final Fantasy 7 for all these years and would like to continue that, just kind of give this one a break. Yeah. So Eris dying, I think, is the big one. I was about to say, you can't dodge that. How do you dodge that and be on the internet?
Okay. Hear me out, all right? This is it's trippy. So somewhere in the back of my brain, I think I probably have heard of it, right?
Okay.
And so as I'm playing remake, right, in my brain, I'm like, oh yeah, I know this character's supposed to die. And every time I thought that, in my subconscious, there was an image of a game. Okay? There was an image of an old game where this character dies. Okay?
Yeah.
And so the whole time I'm expecting it to happen in remake. And I'm playing through it, and it doesn't happen. And I'm like, okay, well, remake's a shorter portion of the game, and blah, blah, blah. And so then I'm playing through original, and I'm going through it, and I'm waiting for it to happen. and it doesn't. And it doesn't. And in my head, I have this image of a game where, now that I think about it, the art style isn't even the same. But the vision I had in my head like should have happened like within Midgar or around Midgar, like that starting town. And I leave Midgar and it hasn't happened. So in my head I'm like, oh, I must be thinking of a different game.
Well,
and I was like, okay. And so then I'm like, and I'm all aboard the Aerith is best girl train. Nothing is going to change my mind even after having finished the game. So in my mind I'm like, oh, this is great, because I think Aerith is an absolutely lovely character. I am emotionally invested in this character, and now she's not going to die.
Oh no,
because it didn't match up with the image in my head. So then I got there and I did not know that it was coming.
Yeah,
it was devastating. I don't think I've ever lost so much energy in a single instant during a live stream.
You know what?
I
can say that that's probably the best way of going about it, is that you didn't have to like purposely like cut yourself off, but at the same time you also didn't need to you still got the intended effect, because like I'm a big wiki reader. Like I'm a big one of those people that if I'm like marginally interested in something, but I know that I don't know how much I'm going to like it, I will go and like look up wiki stuff, especially for older things. But that kind of robs the experience of if I ever do decide to play the game, because I know what's going to happen and I know, almost how I'm supposed to feel. And that sucks in a lot of ways. Like I think we brought up before,
right?
Me playing Persona and being like, okay, I want to play it all in one run. And it's like, you're not really playing it the way that you're supposed to. So I'm happy that you got to do that anyway, because like, that's the intended way. And if it makes you feel any better, like the idea of her dying out of nowhere is supposed to be the intended like way of processing it, because they were just like, we don't want to make it dramatic, we don't want to make it like expected, we just want to have it be not glamorous and just something that just hits you like a truck. And from what I understand anyway, it's like I bought Final Fantasy 7 for the Switch and I have it on PC as well. I played it more on the Switch because they have the cheats almost. But I realize I think I'm going to restart it in order to not use it, because I just haven't been engaging with the game because it's really easy. I haven't got to that part yet, and yeah, it's a cultural touchstone, man. It's something that every gamer from a certain generation has an opinion on or has thoughts on.
Yeah, and so one thing that came up, not just in that moment, but like throughout the entire game, and even after having finished it, is I was thoroughly blown away by how well the story presents itself. Like the writing, whether it's the writing or the pacing or even like the graphics, obviously that you have to account for what year it came out, which is 1997. But some things I would have to account for the age of the game, but others, for instance, like even, whether, like you said, whether it's like that scene, while it's a little sudden and like, to be honest, I guess these days, right, if it were a movie, like it'd be impactful, but people would definitely question like loopholes and whatever.
Yeah.
I also, like in my head, I know there are loopholes, but they present it in a way where those loopholes linger more as questions rather than that doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah.
Rather than contradictions.
Yeah.
And I was very impressed with how this game is affected me from an emotional standpoint with just writing and, I guess, in today's standards, quote unquote, bad graphics or old graphics. Because you have to imagine that I've now gone through obviously much more of my life than when the game came out. I've seen much more, right? I've been exposed to much more entertainment. I know certain tropes to expect. I know certain characters and personality traits in stories. And you get a little jaded. It's like, it's hard to shock you and it's hard to impact you unless it's different, or you like bring back an old one that's been forgotten or things like that. And this game put me in a perpetual state of shock.
I was going to ask about that jaded feeling, because that was this thing that I like thought about. I was like, are we just like old enough that now when we consume this kind of stuff, we are thinking, okay, this is the story beat that's it's almost like you're trying to predict it instead of actually engaging with it. Instead of being like taken away by the plot or whatever, you're basically just thinking like, oh, okay, this is a death flag for someone. Like I'm kind of, it's almost like you're trying to get into the developers' heads and you're trying to say, okay, like this is the flow of the game. This is narratively what's going to happen. You're almost trying to like predict like, oh, we just got into this town. This is what story beat's going to happen now. And because you're doing that, you're not actually just like enjoying the story for what it is. You're basically just trying to beat the story in your head. And I brought up pro wrestling on this podcast before, but it's kind of the same where you're not actually watching the match. All what you're really thinking about is how the performers are trying to subvert your expectations or trying to, you know, play off of tropes and that kind of stuff. It's the same thing with games where you just think, okay, I've played enough games with romance elements in it. Like, which other games are they pulling from in order to do this? Or is it going to be different? Or is it going to just like shock me? It's like, just brain, shut up and enjoy the game for what it is. It's, you know, like I'm one of those people that, you know, tries to analyze it, and I don't mean to sound pretentious through that. It's more of, I don't know. I have a very hard time sometimes just turning my brain off.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like you said, the more you're exposed to unconsciously, you just predict it, right? And sometimes it's to guard yourself, right? If it's like a sad thing that you think is coming up or whatever. But, you know, it's the same with scary movies, right? One of the ways people combat it is you like watch enough and you kind of know when things are going to happen, or jump scares, or, you know, when somebody says a line, you're like, okay, that means they're going out first.
Yeah, exactly.
You just know that they're the first one to die. But I think what really got me was it made me actually think about how, like you said, how much we've lost a little bit in terms of, well, specifically when it comes to gaming, because obviously Final Fantasy 7 is a game, where, for instance, another good example is I'm a grinder in games, like just by default. That is my default mode. If I know that it is a RPG that has items and weapons and cool stuff that I can collect that is probably hidden behind like different hidden missions and rooms, like I will look for it, and I will not be satisfied until it is complete, and I will also not be satisfied until I know I'm minimum like equal level as the next opponents I'm supposed to face. That's just how I play RPGs. But this game, and I think, you know, I was saying during my broadcast of it, partly I think also because I was streaming, and obviously I was interacting with people who, you know, most of them knew the story, some of them didn't. Almost because it left out so much, right? Almost because there were so many loopholes, I just had so many questions that I couldn't ever just sit there and be like, okay, I'm going to play for 3 hours today and just like grind levels or abilities or whatever.
Yeah.
Because in my head, I'm like, I could do that, but all like that's not going to help me figure out these 25 questions I have. Sadly, those 25 questions just never got answered anyway. But, you know, that part aside, the pacing of it, and just like I just couldn't believe that in that age of the late 90s they made this expansive story that just punches you with a new twist or a new, you know, knowledge bomb like every other hour. And like how do you not get hooked? And so I was saying, I now understand, like I now really understand why this game is hailed as such a masterpiece and is usually almost always in everyone's top games they've played, if they played it when, you know, when it came out. Because you, like, if I'm getting hit by it this hard in 2020, I cannot imagine the impact it had in late 90s, you know?
Yeah, that's the thing, is that, like, for me, that game is Chrono Trigger, where, like,
right.
You think about the dream, like, you know, they marketed it as the dream team, where it was like, okay, this is the musicians and the developers and the writers of all these different SNES games or SNES RPGs that everyone likes. And it's thinking about in that context where you're just like, man, for the time, it's like having New Game Plus or having just all these little like minor things that affect the ending, or I think about it in terms of how complex the systems are, and it actually isn't a very complex game. You can't really build characters. You don't really have a choice in like what role they're fulfilling or anything like that. Everyone pretty much has the element of magic that they get, and these are the optimal items for it. But for Final Fantasy VII, it's like I feel like I missed the boat on it a little bit, and it was one of those things.
I think our Discord just died.
Okay, Discord is dying. Okay. Hello, everybody. Sorry, we had a little bit of a technical issue with Discord and that kind of stuff. Ping both from our locations, but also I imagine that with the quarantine and everything like that, people are just like, this is almost like a giant stress test for any like web service that offers communication or something like that. So yeah, we just edited out a little bit of us just troubleshooting, but we're going to kind of just start where we left off. But yeah, like I said, Chrono Trigger, I kind of missed the boat a little bit when it came to Final Fantasy VII, and because like I never had a PlayStation growing up. I had a PlayStation 2 relatively late in its life. I have a copy of Final Fantasy VII, like the 3-disc like greatest hits PS1 game that I borrowed from a friend and never returned. I'm that guy.
Oh my!
Not on purpose.
Oh my!
Not on purpose.
Man!
Not on purpose. This was an accident.
Okay.
To be fair, I messaged said friend later and was like, I got this. Do you want it back? And he's like, no, you can keep it. So.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's not like a specifically, like, it's not a mint in box, version or whatever.
Sure.
It's scratched to hell and back. But my point is that, like, I could have experienced it, but it's one of those things where I just never got, I don't want to say never got around to, but it's like, hearing you talk it up makes me like excited to play it. And I don't know if that's putting expectations in me or whatever, but at the same time, I'm like, I know the experience that I have with it so far is very flawed, because like I'm up to like Wu Tai, which is like where you meet Yuffie and you do that side quest and stuff like that. I did that immediately after getting the ship.
Sid?
Sid in the ship and that kind of stuff. So
I did the same thing. And apparently, well, I also I got stuck in this weird time loop in Wu Tai trying to complete everything in Wu Tai.
You can't leave. That's the thing, is that you can't leave because the events of the story essentially lock you into that area. And so the thing is, I've got up to there and I'm still not on board. Like, I'm still not like hooked yet, you know?
Really?
And like I said,
that's pretty late.
Part of it is, well, Eris is still alive in my game.
True.
Like, we haven't gone that far yet. So I don't know where we are disc wise in the original like 3-disc, act structure kind of thing. But the thing is that I'm still not hooked yet because I think the thing that I like most about RPGs is by engaging in the system, you encourage attachment. You get attached to the characters, or you get attached to the world, because you're spending so much more time building up your characters, and not necessarily grinding, but every time that you're in a battle, if you're spending the time in the battle and seeing like how your characters interact, if they are speaking, or if they are just like, even if you're just projecting a personality on top of them, that is that's aided by how much time you're spending in the game itself. And like I said, in the version that I'm playing, there's a 3x speed up. There's a instantly refill health, mana, and limit break. It doesn't make you invincible, but it makes you pretty damn close. And there's also a thing that turns off random encounters. So I really have no stakes, and I also really have minimized the amount of time that I've spent in the game itself. And that's why I think I'm going to be deleting all my saves, playing on the PC version that doesn't have those cheats. I'd say cheats. Yes, they are cheats, but they're also like quality of life. I think a lot of games these days, especially with replays, like games that
speed up,
games that are released on other platforms that have a long playtime. They're realizing people just want to play it again. They're probably going to buy it a second time, so let's just unlock these features that make it a little smoother. Because I'm speeding along certain things, I'm not engaging with the game. Like, most of my random encounters, every turn I have a limit break, and it's like that makes that makes combat silly. Like I got Vincent Valentine the earliest I possibly could because I couldn't die to the boss that is guarding him, and you're not supposed to necessarily fight that on your first time. So because I'm not engaging with the system, because I'm not tweaking my characters, like I don't know what my I know what my materia does, but like I'm not tweaking my character stats wise. I'm not building Cloud into an auto attack kind of person, or building Barrett into magic. I'm just using examples there. I'm not actually engaging with the game system, and that means that I'm not as attached to the story. I know what happens, and I'm not just like mashing through the text, but at the same time, because I'm not as attached, I don't really care, and I don't want to just write off the game as, oh, let's just get through it so I can say that I've finished it. So like I said, I'm probably just going to restart it completely, because I know that for me, I can't resist using those cheats, especially like if I already don't have an attachment, I can't resist using those. So I to get what everyone else is getting, like I just want to experience what everyone else is experiencing. It's like you saying that this, you hyping this up. I'm not saying you're hyping it up like from a bad perspective. It's more of
right.
You communicating how good this was for you. I want to experience that too. So I don't know.
It's. I mean, I was surprised at how good it was for me. Right. Like, because I'll be honest. I went in thinking, all right, like, especially after having played remake. I'm going in and I was like, listen, put expectations low, like, and it's an old game, blah, blah, blah. And the only thing I think to the end where I was blatantly upset about from, because the game is old, right? That can only be excused by the age is like, so the way the battle mechanic works for those who do not know anything about Final Fantasy VII, it's turn-based combat, and so you have to like pick a target whenever you use auto attacks or magic, but it's not like these days that's very streamlined. But in this game, I thought it was so weird that it is based on the camera angle that you currently have of all the targets on screen, both your team and their team. And like if an enemy moves in to attack, they would move forward. So now instead of having, for instance, pressing down to target them, you suddenly have to press right during that animation to target them. Like that's just a very janky mechanic. That's it's just explained by age, and it was never really thought through. That was like the only thing where I'd be like, okay, this part sucked because the game is old, but like the graphics and everything, in my head, I could easily just be like, yeah, it's an old game. It was and I could just see that it was freaking glorious for late 90s. And it didn't bother me. Like there were certain moments where I thought it was, funny maybe when it shouldn't be just because, the animations are old, but it didn't bother me. And yeah, I was just taken aback at how much I could actually just enjoy it. But I will say now, listening to you talk about it, I think maybe I was able to get invested earlier on than I would have normally playing it in 2020 because I played Remake first. And the reason I say that is because Remake obviously gives all of them new voices, right? Gives them some of them like new story backgrounds and character development. And so even though all of that's missing in the first portion of the game in original, I can already project that onto them because I've been exposed to it in a different medium, right? So even though those conversations aren't happening,
it makes sense.
Like I can look at Avalanche, and they like don't play much of a character role at all in the original, but I'm like, oh, like I remember this line they said in Remake, or oh, like I remember their voices from Remake, right? And so to me, I suddenly just have instant attachments to these characters before they've even really done anything in the original, which probably helped me get through that first portion, because all the like you said, all the big twists and punches like come after a certain point, which is very, very deep into the game. So
it's almost like you can
that's one,
like it's almost you can extrapolate, like you can look at Final Fantasy VII and be like, okay, these characters don't really have a lot of development or whatever, but I've seen how developed they are in Remake, so it doesn't necessarily bother me in the original that they aren't as developed, because I know what, like I can just extrapolate from what I know from the Remake.
Exactly, yeah. And then in terms of the stakes, so it's funny that you mentioned that, because let me tell you a story where, so like you said, I ended up also going to Wutai, I guess, comparatively early than when most people would go, right after you meet Sid and you get the airship. The like you said, things happen in the story where you basically can't leave because a bunch of your stuff is stolen, and you're stuck there. And then so I wiped in Wutai. My party wiped, and then I realized I hadn't saved until like before I met Sid. And if you can remember the game, there's a lot of cutscenes in the process of meeting Sid, and there's just a lot of time.
Oh, no.
And so we go back, and I'm like, all right, you know what? We're just gonna speed through it. I'm gonna get back. I'm gonna get my revenge. And so what I do. You're not going to believe this, Matt. I went into the menu to speed up the text in cutscenes.
Yeah.
Of course. But for some reason, going right, which is usually like a higher number, is slower in the game menu.
Oh,
it actually makes the text slower. So I maxed it out, and now we're sitting there slowly reading these cutscenes letter by letter.
And you can't change it until you get back to a place
and you
where
can't
control.
change it. Yeah, but in that whole sequence, it goes from like cutscene to boss battle to cutscene. So I'm like, so we just sat there, and never did something in a game fuel me more to get through a portion of the game than the frustration I had to suffer.
I can mash my button faster than each letter can come out. This is a problem.
Seriously. Yeah, it was but yeah, I think like that was one of the first times I like had a full party wipe. But like I said, obviously it resulted in this like funny interaction with the game, but that was also definitely like you said, there's a risk, right? There's something on the line, and so I care more. I also my community gives me a hard time for this, but I spend a lot of time in my menus because I like to tinker with everything in RPGs. So as you were saying, because you had these other abilities available to you because of the game copy, maybe you didn't tinker with like the materia or something like that. I would swap out materia like every time I had the chance, right? And I'd like try these new things, and I think all of that. But I think it really just comes down to probably the biggest boost I had was the fact that I played Remake first, and that I think actually added a positive than a negative, because while maybe some of those character predictions aren't necessarily like correct for the original, it definitely helps me get invested and have predictions on why I might be invested later at the very least.
No, that makes sense.
And yeah, it carried me through that first part. I think like, I went into original being like, I don't care what anyone tells me, Aerith is the best girl in this game. And that argument is settled for me. And then, I got hit with the bombshell, and I was very sad. But
so in that vein, do you think I liked how I titled last episode's podcast is the one we don't spoil Final Fantasy VII. This is the one where we do spoil Final Fantasy VII. So the thing about Remake is that a lot of people are either hot or cold on the fact that it changes or influences a lot. Like it implies that, okay, this is a parallel timeline to Final Fantasy VII, the original. We are either going to be like changing stuff, or we are like Sephiroth is trying to go and alter the timeline and blah blah blah. Do you think that they are going to just be like, okay, Aerith lives in this one and Tifa dies in this one because so that's the thing, right? Is that people are like doing several layers of, oh, they know that we expect Aerith to live, so maybe they'll kill her again just to shock us. Like they introduced the copy of a modified timeline in the first game, and then almost you're thinking, oh crap, all bets are off. Maybe Aerith lives in this one because, they have the power to change the timeline, and the original game is immutable. Maybe they'll let her live in this one. And then you're like, oh, well, they now know that our brain is going to go to that first. Maybe they'll still kill her, or maybe they'll kill Tifa, or maybe they'll kill Barrett or something like that. And it's like, now you're trying to metagame. yeah, now you're trying to basically meta game the plot. You're trying to put yourself in the shoes of the developer and being like, how do we screw with, or how do we make, not screw with our players, but how do we make this experience as memorable as the old game was in terms of the shock of that character death? How do we make that experience in the new remake games? And now that, like I said, now that they've opened things up to modifying the timeline, or not being a straight remake, like, what are your predictions or thoughts, or do you have any like feelings in your gut?
Yeah, I do actually. And so this is one of the big reasons I ended up choosing to play the original, right? Because I saw just so much discussion and debate and controversy about, what remake did and didn't do. And I just wanted to know, like, how much of that is, right, like nostalgia, again, not a bad thing, but how much of that is nostalgia? Where is it coming from? Maybe it impacts new players differently. So I'll say this. First and foremost, like, playing through a remake with no background, I didn't really have a problem with the story other than it didn't resolve, but I also knew, like, this was just the first part, so I was okay with that, right? As a new player, like, none of that really meant anything to me. I was left with a lot of questions, but I was breathtaking because I had all these questions I really wanted to know. And then I decided to play original, partly to get these answers, which, again, most of them I didn't get. But I played the original, and having played through it, first and foremost, I'm of the party where I don't think remake necessarily translates to we are in a different timeline. I think the way they've presented it opens up that option, but I can also easily see that just being, the changes they made or the additions they made being ways for them to help tie up some loose ends rather than necessarily change, like, the timeline or the universe. I don't think it necessitates that. If they choose to do it, now they have a backup reason of why they could, but if they don't, like, I also wouldn't be surprised if the overarching story does not change in the general course, right? Obviously some details are gonna change and whatnot, but so that's the first thing. I don't think, and if I could ever have a chance to talk to, right, the writers and the dev team, I would actually persuade them that I don't think there's a need to metagame it just to have the same, like, shock factor and impact that the original did. And here's why. Like, if the original can still, and granted, I somehow miraculously avoided spoilers for 23 years, and maybe I'm, one of the only
two people
beings on Earth to be able to to do that. But like, if the original with the bad graphics, or the old graphics I should say, and the old mechanics and poor translation and writing can still hit me just as hard, I think following that overarching storyline can still hit anyone just as hard in a new generation. And to be honest, right, the type of character development they did in remake with some of the side characters, like, that was enough to punch people in the gut, even people who did play classic, right? Even people who were watching my playthrough or, watching other people's playthrough. Now talk about these new moments that never existed because side character development was never a thing in the original. Like, that punched them real hard. Did that change the course of the story? Not necessarily. It doesn't have to. But it still has the impact. And even the original cast, just the layers you can now add with the new graphics and the voice acting and the animation, like, right. And so as I was playing the original, we'd always have this conversation, me and the viewers would always have this conversation of, like, this is going to look so crazy in remake, this is going to make me cry so much harder in remake, right? This is going to shock me so much in remake, because now that we've seen what they're capable of in remake with the new engine and everything, like, you're just waiting for your mind to be blown about something you already know, because you can already just add so much more. So I would, if I was ever given a chance to talk to them and I found out they were considering making sweeping changes for the sake of impact, I would actually argue completely against that, unless that was the original intention and they want to write a completely new story within the same universe, right? If that was the original mission and they think they can succeed, like, that's fine. But if it's only for the sake of impact, I would argue, no, I think this, just the layers you add simply do enough. And by let's be honest, by the time the full thing comes out, there's gonna be more people that like don't really know the whole story because new generations are being born, and they won't always be in tune with all the like memes about Final Fantasy 7 and things like that, as much as a age-old classic it is. So yeah, I'm just torn on that debate as someone who is new to the series, and then played Remake first. I get why people have doubts, right? I get why a lot of people just assume it's going to change, and I think it's mostly just to safeguard their nostalgia and hearts when it does change. But as a new person, like, I don't think people are like picking apart different like Easter eggs in Remake and being like, this is why it proves they're going to change the storyline. And I'm like, I don't know. As a new player, I did not think that. And then now knowing the story, I don't think it has to change. Can it? Sure. Partly, I hope no. And my hope is, again, these new features and stories they've added are more there to help answer questions. So that was my only kind of qualm. A special moment we had when I finished the original Final Fantasy VII was I just completely lost it. I was just cackling in laughter for like 2 minutes because I could not believe that it ended like that it ended that way. Yeah, it was just it felt like a very abrupt ending with none of the loose ends tied. Which again doesn't detract from what an impact it had on me, and what attachments I had with the characters. But I almost hope that all these new kind of features within their story and writing are developed now so that they can tie up those loose ends.
Let me ask you this: do you think that these kind of like remakes have, or like the I don't want to say the culture of remakes or like the trend of remakes, whatever, is it just a opportunity
cash grab?
Well, not a cash grab. Yeah, like I have thoughts on that with the remasters and stuff like that, where they don't really do anything. They just slap a coat of paint on it or make it work on a PS4 and say $60 again, please. My thoughts are, how as a developer do you just not like, how do you resist the siren call of just giving fan service to people? Like, how do you look at a game like Final Fantasy VII that is just like universally acclaimed and people are writing essays and dissertations and crap about it? People are basing their entire online lives around, your characters and your world, or like naming their kids or whatever. How do you approach that as a director and say, we are not going to just make this remake a celebration of Final Fantasy. We're not going to just like correct all the things that you think we did wrong. We're not going to just put in a bunch of things that are going to make you happy as fans. We are going to make it still stand on its own as a viable property, or like we are going to still,
you mean like the remake version stands on its own?
Well, like stands on its own or still has its own artistic merit, I guess. It's like I guess I'm a little cynical about like, big studio productions, and maybe like Final Fantasy is one of those things that is just so untouchable in terms of creative freedom. It's not like Sony is going to go and say you need to put this and this in, but like being in their shoes, Nomura's shoes, and just being like, man, people want us to revive Aerith or like keep her from dying. Let's just do that to make people happy. It's like we've said all we need. We've said all we needed to say in the original version in terms of like shocking people or disappointing people or that kind of artistic merit. In this remake, why don't we just make everything happy and make everything, as it should be, or what people really want out of it? It's like, I imagine the temptation has got to be huge just to like,
yeah, I mean, I think it can be, but I think if you're setting off on a mission for a actual remake, right, and not a remaster, I think you're going in because you must have an expectation and imagination about like the story or the game, right? And especially when it comes to a game like Final Fantasy VII that is actually pretty old, especially within the gaming timeline. There's a lot of imagination that's left open, right? Whether it's the characters' like voices or their actual personalities, right? Or maybe their actual looks, because back then it was just polygons, and and all of that. And I think the first part of remake proves that that can be done pretty well without not necessarily just giving fan service. Um, like I don't know. For instance, okay, so for instance, there are like certain cutscenes in, I think we talked about this briefly before, in remake that happened much earlier in remake. You know, that would come much later in the original, and things like that. And some people are saying, well, they just like put that in early to as fan service for the nostalgic fans. But when I played through remake, it didn't like it brought up questions. But again, I wasn't like, well, what the hell is this doing in here, right? I was just like, oh my gosh, like what is that? Um, and I got so much more invested. So I again, I don't think those can be seen, or they can, I guess I should say, they can act as double agents where they are satisfying fan service but also furthering a new mission for a creative remake. And obviously, you know, no matter how powerful you are and no matter what brand name you have as a creative, like at the end of the day, if you work in a company, like, yes, there are going to be business aspects. I'm sure the topic comes up of like, we think this is what the people want. And that, I think that's something you always have to combat as a creative, right? Even for instance, even for myself, when I was in esports, it was about like when do you cut to players, right? Or like, where do you put the player cams, and or like, how do you do the opening scene? It's like, oh well, you know, this is what people on Reddit say they want, and it's like, well, like if I have a reason, right, on this direction that I'm choosing, then I'm gonna take the risk. And sometimes I was right, sometimes I was terribly wrong. But as a creative, you kind of have to stand up for that and risk it. Like you said, is Final Fantasy VII really the brand to like take a big risk in? Maybe not. But at the same time, on the other side of the coin is what you said but if you don't do it, you're probably actually, it settles for so much less, even if it doesn't create trouble. And that's not what that brand stands for. Final Fantasy VII doesn't stand for a okay game, right? It stands for a life-changing game and a generation-changing game. So I don't think I have faith for now, and maybe I'm just being optimistic, but I don't think they would do any big change. Like they might do, again, maybe small cutscenes or, you know, certain character lines or whatever, just as fan service, but I don't think they would change or not change any overarching story plots for the sake of fan service. I think from what I've seen of the remake and now playing through the original, I can definitely tell that this is a work of passion from people who had their own imaginations about this world, like playing through and or working on the original game. And so I think they're just going to follow that and see if they can bring it to life. And again, like just even simply the tools of voice acting and new animation and graphic technology can do so much, right? There's like a cool chase scene in both games. And I was amazed at how well it worked in the original, by the way, for such an old console. But it, like, the new one just blows it out of the water, and it like recreates it 1-to-1, but leaves such a bigger impact because it's utilizing all those tools so well with like new music and, or, you know, variations on the track with new sound technology and the graphics and the effects, and it just brings it to life to what we're now accustomed to seeing in like a sci-fi fantasy world.
It's like I kind of think about Star Wars, where it kind of comes down to like before, you know, we talk about the sequel trilogy or prequels or whatever, there is the thought of Han shot first. It's the idea of changing a scene in order to imply a different thing about their characters. And for people who don't know, you can look it up on Wikipedia, but you know, in the original cut of Star Wars, Han Solo shoots Greedo first, and the idea is that George Lucas thought, I don't want Han Solo to be portrayed as a cold-blooded killer. I want Greedo to shoot first, and then Han will shoot a split second later in order to act in self-defense rather than proactively murdering someone else. And the idea was that it changes the context of the character, but in the fans basically were like, come on, we can understand, you know, why Han would do that first. You know, like we do not need to be handheld to that degree. We can appreciate some nuance in our characters and development and that kind of stuff. And then it just kind of became this whole kerfuffle where it was changed and then changed back. And, you know, different cuts of the movie have different ways of interpreting the same character. And the reason I bring this up is that being so insecure about that and not trusting your viewers to understand why that original choice was made, you need to have confidence as a creator. You need to have confidence that your vision is the right one. And I think that really contributes to that decision of whether to make something really fan servicey or not, is to just be like, this thing's going to sell, and I know it's going to sell based on my vision, and I know that the vision that I have is right. And like you were saying, I always struggled with this with, you know, Social for Evil Geniuses was, you know, the voices, the loudest voices aren't always the right ones. And just because you're seeing a segment that's really loud in one direction, there could be a much larger segment that wants the opposite but just isn't saying it, right? So like you were saying with broadcasting and stuff like that, it's like there are definitely ways to pander to Reddit, but Reddit isn't the entire viewer base and Reddit isn't the entire internet, you know? So having confidence in your product and having confidence in your vision, it's like that is one of those things where you've earned that, especially for the people who are working on the Final Fantasy series or working on this remake. They have earned the ability to be creative unchecked, or to be able to say, we're just going to mess with the viewer, you know, for the player. Because we've built up what's the word? We've built up confidence in our skills, and we've built up like a credibility that we know what we're doing. And we don't have to, like, if you're a creator in that situation of trying to put in fan service or not, ultimately it's about, okay, are people going to love this? And if you're confident enough in your vision to know that people are going to love your product regardless of whether you pander to them or not, that's good, you know, that it keeps you at least artistically honest, and it probably makes the product a little bit better. It's because fan service is like junk food. It's like every once in a while it's nice, and, you know, maybe it's nice to binge every once in a while, but if it's your entire thing, you know, it gets predictable, it's bad, and it gets like, it loses its consistency. Have you ever seen the film Jiro Dreams of Sushi?
I've never actually watched it.
But you've heard of it?
Yes.
Okay. So for people who don't know, it's a documentary about a sushi chef who's like 89. I think he's probably in his 90s now that the movie's been out for a couple years. But he's been doing this literally like since he needed a job. So he's been like a sushi chef for almost like, you know, 65 years or whatever. And at some point in the movie, the part of the movie that always sticks with me is they're talking to a restaurant critic, and they're saying he has 5 like qualities that make like all chefs great, and he has all 5 of them. And he's difficult to work with. He's impatient. He's a perfectionist. He has an eye for detail. And I don't remember the last one, but the idea is, like, for me, if you read off those qualities, like, without the context of explaining like a creative, because, you know, chefs are creatives, I would think that generally makes someone a very not unreasonable person, but a person that I wouldn't want to like hang around with. Like, if you're describing those as qualities of people, I would say, oh, I don't like that person, or I don't like those qualities in people. But as I've come to like be in positions where I can express my own vision, or at least take things in my own direction, I look at that scene every once in a while and I just say, wow, that's amazing. And I totally like agree that in some situations you have to just be like, nope, we are not going to play fan service to this audience. We are going to screw with them, and it's for I don't want to say it's for their own good, because that's a little like preachy, but at the same time it's like you know, I have so much confidence in my vision that I know it's the right one, and my gut and everything that I'm saying in my heart and in my brain is telling me that this decision is the right one. It's like, for a lot of creatives, that is a very good skill to have, rather than, oh, okay, what does Sony want? Does Sony want Aerith to live? You know, if that was what it came down to, if people were able to find out the only reason that this character that they care so much about and have maybe spent decades caring about, the only reason that they lived is because Sony said that she should live, how would that make those people feel? You know, it wouldn't be a decision based on actually caring about the player. It's just to sell more copies, you know, or for people to get that fantasy of their waifu living, you know, and that kind of rings a bit hollow. That kind of is a bit negative, or at least would jade me further than I am now, if that makes sense.
Mm. Right. Yeah. I think it's what you said though, especially in this scenario, is just if you look at the people, right? These are people that have built up a rapport and a credibility. It's like, for instance, it's like Kojima, right?
Yeah.
Like Kojima does what Kojima wants, and sometimes it's crazy, but like you almost just kind of like it because it's crazy, right? Even if you didn't like the actual content. Same with shoot, I'm blanking on the name of the guy behind Nier.
I'm
blanking out hard on that name, but he's the same way, right? Where
I'm
like
looking it up right now.
even
Sorry.
yeah, even within Nier Automata, like
Yeah.
everyone was just like, oh yeah, that's just what he does.
Yoko Taro.
Yes, yeah, Yoko Taro, exactly.
The
Like
guy with the
Yoko
mask.
and exactly, he carries himself like that whenever he's doing announcements and everything, and everyone's just like, oh yeah, like the reason we like it is because it's crazy, and I would have never expected it, and maybe it's technically bad, but like I didn't expect bad, so now it's good, right? It almost goes that way. So I think because these people have that rapport, that being a reason, right? The fan service or the business fan service being a reason for any changes, I think can rest easy. In the case of Final Fantasy VII Remake, whether the changes they make are well received or not, obviously, again, a whole different question. But it's actually hard for me, other than if you're only jaded because of how remakes have been, right? And it's tough. Or, for instance, I know a lot of people are jaded or are a little concerned about the future of Remake because Nomura is infamous for just the convoluted story of Kingdom Hearts, right?
Yeah.
If you're concerned because it might get convoluted, I think that's valid, right? Because clearly this guy has a knack for doing that. But at the same time, from what I've seen in my very shallow experience of the Final Fantasy world, is like Remake seems to give a proper nod to the original. I think it really does, and even the like cutscenes that are pulled up early, or the ending of Remake that maybe seems a little out of place. I don't sit here and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, now I'm worried, right? I'm just like, oh, that's so cool. It's like I would say some of those, yeah, definitely are just there to be like, hey, we didn't forget about this memorable moment, or hey, this memorable moment is definitely happening in Remake, or it's coming. Yeah, it's definitely there, but like, is that really a bad thing? No, that's probably because they also believe that it's important and it's symbolic of the game. And at the very least, I never felt that a part in Remake was done in a shallow manner, right? Like the effort was clearly all there, whether it's the cutscenes or certain battle scenes or character interactions. None of it felt like it was just shoehorned in to fit it in. It still had the same polish and quality, which is why I say this I think it can still carry the same impact.
It's the thing is that all this discussion that we're having has already been like done before, if that makes sense, in the sense that we're talking about auteur cinema. Like we're talking about people that Stanley Kubrick's or whatever, that have such a strong vision that they are allowed to kind of like express themselves and their art in that level of control over their product. And like I think one of the things about gaming that make in Twitch by extension is that we're seeing the replay, so to speak, of the film industry and art in cinema. We're just seeing that very compressed and fast forwarded almost, where it's like how I explain streaming to people, or the streaming industry to people, is I say, imagine the music industry. Imagine the entire history of performing music for money, from like the Middle Ages, of traveling troubadours or whatever, to now. We saw that history entirely compressed into about 5 years with streaming, where for people just doing it for fun, and then people discovering money, and people exploding in terms of being able to make a lot of money. And now we're seeing an oversaturation in terms of, it's very accessible, but the success is not easy to have. So it's the same kind of thing with gaming, is that, cinema goes through that. Oh, we have color to work with now. It's the same thing with 3D. It's like, oh, we have 3D to work with now. And then you get past all the technical limitations, and now we're we have development environments that have very few technical limitations besides budget and besides, computing power. And I think that's one of the things you brought up, Kojima. Kojima's has a vision and he has a very smart, way of constructing stories, but he's terrible with budget. It's like with Tim Schafer, or it's like with Tim Schafer made Double Fine. Like he makes all those adventure games and stuff like that, but he's notoriously terrible about budget. He,
right.
So anyways, my point is that like, I like that we're having these discussions about games because it shows that the art form is maturing. And I'm not one of those people that just sits here and be like, oh man, I wish games were like movies, like I like that gaming is its own unique thing. And I like that it has its own like unique, like, things about it. I don't think all games need to be like super mature for adults, Oscar bait kind of thing. I think that there are, is room for games to just be goofy and fun, whatever. But I like that we're having this discussion about a game, like you said, that has just such a long history that when it is remade, people are like, it's like Lord of the Rings, right? It's like Lord of the Rings, where people are like, how can you possibly remake it? Or how can you possibly make it into film, in the first place? And then you have someone with such a strong vision and such a big respect for that canon and knows every, aspect of it, that you have those very successful theatrical versions. But for the uber nerds, you have all those extended editions that have all these like one scene things where they're like, okay, we can kind of cut it out, but we'll throw it in the DVD because it is some canon that someone can be like, oh, I remember that from the books, so
right.
I don't know. I'm gonna probably wait until I didn't buy the remake of Final Fantasy VII. I thought to myself, I don't care enough about it to buy it for PS4. It'll either come out on PC because Final Fantasy 15 did. I almost said 25.
Right.
I don't know why. We'll probably get there one day. But if it comes out on PC, I'll probably get it. If it stays on PlayStation the entire way through till the end, I'll get it when it's ended. Or I'll probably be like you, where I'll play Final Fantasy VII, the original, seriously, get hooked on it, and then buy the remake. But at the moment, I'm just like, I'm content to just waiting until it's a full vision instead of like I had with Mass Effect. Mass Effect, I beat the first game.
Right.
I beat the first game the day before it came out because I worked at a video store at the time. And I was looking forward to it for so long and following every news story. I talked to my boss and I said that, oh man, I'm so obsessed with this game. I can't wait for it to come out. And he's like, yeah, just have it back by the release day. And I'm like, holy shit. So I beat it in like 3 days. And as I'm sitting there at the end of the first game, I'm like, oh crap, I got to wait like 2 years until the next one.
Yeah, that's the part I'm a little concerned about. Is if I can be that patient, but what choice do I have?
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Maybe that's just a good place to leave it off on, is that like, we've got I hope they pull it off, and I hope they stick the landing, and that's maybe it's gonna give a whole bunch of more of podcast discussions and essays and whatever and dissertations, is can they stick the landing? And it almost depends on how jaded you are now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, fully agree.
Where can people find you on the internet, Will?
You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Twitch as Will Chobra. So that's WILLCHOBRA. If you also want to just take part in hanging out and chatting with the community, or whether it's even about this podcast or the other podcasts I do as well, you can actually join. I just finally set up a community Discord. So you can find that. It's actually pinned on my Twitter. That's the easiest way, because I don't have a custom URL yet. But you can join in on various discussions and fun on Discord as well.
I'm going to do that right now. Cool. Do you have any like plans for like what you're streaming or whatever this week?
Well, yeah, I mean, apparently I am now a permanent Final Fantasy and horror game streamer. So, honestly, I am just happy that this Final Fantasy VII Remake and the original has really rekindled my fire for JRPGs. It's also, again, something I've mentioned on my stream as well. I'm actually having a lot of fun discussing these classics with people who have played them growing up, and then me encountering them for the first time. It's a very special thing, and also creates for some fun discussions. So happy doing that. Obviously, still looking around for like Valorant content stuff, whether it's on my own or with some other people. Valorant being the new first-person shooter, like competitive title from Riot. So there's that, and then obviously, we're kind of in a prime time for a lot of esports stuff. I know we want to talk about that a little bit today, but I think maybe we can pick that up next week. That could be where we start. So I'll be catching a lot of that as well. What about you, Matt?
I have. You can find me first of all on most platforms as Matt Demers, MattDemers on Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, all that stuff. I am pretty much going to be working on chillhop.com stuff for this week. That's the company I work for. We're going to be doing our first set of like live streams and that kind of stuff. So I'm pretty excited about that. I actually just retooled my formal video game backlog, which I found, that there's a site called howlongtobeat.com, and it's basically just like a community aggregate of like, if you're done playing a game, you put in how long that it took you, and then it'll average out all the times that people submit to give a good idea of like how long a game will take. So like I've got Mega Man X on there on my backlog, and it says that main game 3 hours 27 minutes. So that's an aggregate of all these people's submitted times, but it also is just a general database of games, and it also lets you log your backlog of games that you would like to beat or you're currently playing or whatever. And so I used a site called Backloggery to do this before, and that was another kind of similar game, but this one looks a little bit better, and I have a couple friends who are on it so I can follow their lists and stuff like that. But I have I'm constantly like making plans to start streaming again, but not actually taking that plunge, and I'm going to be doing it soon. And getting this backlog together was part of it, was just being like, I just want a list of every game that I want to play. Even if it's go through my Steam library, get all the games I'm never going to touch out of the way, list all the games that I want to play. And then I can put this on a giant spinner and just pick one game at random. Or I can pick something and just be like, okay, we'll go from there. But that's kind of what I'm planning to do. My other thing is like, I've had really terrible issues with sleep lately in terms of my health, and I'm finally like turning that corner where my hours are good, where I'm like going to bed at midnight, waking up at 8:30 a.m., but my energy didn't catch up to it, and it still hasn't, where like around like noon or like 2 I'll like crash and I could like almost sleep then kind of thing. So I didn't want to try to commit to any like creative endeavor or starting anything new schedule wise until that kind of caught up, and that's finally happening a little bit, so I'm excited about that. Yeah, so nothing in terms of like what I'm going to be doing the next little while, but getting my backlog together and everything like that was really fun. I don't know, that's it for me.
Sounds good. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. That was a fun discussion. We'll look forward to the next one next week, and that'll be all. I guess that's it.
I forgot one thing.
Oh,
we always forget to plug. I always forget to plug the show itself.
Oh yes,
yeah,
please
I know.
do.
If you want to check out our previous episodes or find where we're available to stream, gmncast.com is our site. We're on Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, iTunes, Spotify, all those fun platforms or whatever. If you want to give us feedback on our episodes, we have episode threads on reddit.com/r/gmncast, and I believe that's it. But yeah, there's a couple of episodes where we just don't tell anyone about our podcast, whatever, and I figured that's a good place. But yeah, thanks a lot, guys, for listening. We will see you next week.
All right, have a good morning, Matt.
Have a good night, Will.